The sky had never looked darker than the night they buried her mother. Not because of storm clouds or the absence of the moon, but because something had collapsed inside Omalika that no light could touch. The villagers murmured prayers and shook their heads as the coffin was lowered into the red earth behind the house. Her mother's death had been sudden, confusing. One day she was healthy, sweeping the compound and humming lullabies. The next she was found cold in bed, eyes open, lips parted like she had one last thing to say. They said it was fever, but no one had seen her sick. Only Omalika had seen the strange bruise on her mother's neck, round, deep, and shaped like a thumbprint. Only Omalika noticed the bottle her aunt threw away the next morning. Her aunt, Nkechi, had cried loudly at the funeral. So loudly that people whispered she was performing. Her uncle Emeka hadn't cried at all. He kept his arms folded and his eyes on the girl. And when the last handful of dirt was shoveled over the grave, he spoke for the first time since they had arrived. "The girl will sleep here tonight. Let her be close to the one she failed to save." People chuckled nervously. Some looked away. But no one objected. Omalika said nothing. She hadn't spoken since the morning of the death. So that night, while the neighbors lit fires and retreated into their homes, Omalika was led by the arm into the backyard, where her mother's grave still smelled like freshly upturned soil. A thin raffia mat was tossed to the ground. A single sheet. A crooked lantern. "You're lucky we didn't bury you with her," Nkechi hissed. "Sleep well, little witch." And they left her. Omalika lay on her side, knees drawn to her chest. The ground was uneven and cold beneath the mat. The wind whispered cruel things through the tall grasses. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in days. Not even when they hit her. Not even when they forced her to carry water all day without food. Not even when they dumped out the only photograph she had of her mother and watched the rain smudge the ink until the smile disappeared. But lying there, the grave rising like a quiet hill beneath her back, Omalika felt something she hadn't felt before. Not sadness, not fear. A strange, slow awareness. Like the earth itself had opened one eye to look at her. The first night passed without sleep. She didn't dare close her eyes. Every gust of wind became her mother's voice. Every shifting shadow, her reaching hand. When morning came and the sky turned pale blue, she crawled from the mat and sat cross-legged, staring at the mound of earth. She whispered, "I miss you," but the words barely made it past her lips. Nkechi found her there and laughed. "Still silent?" Good. The dead-like silence. It became routine. Day after day of chores, slaps, burnt food. Night after night, back on the grave. No blanket. No mercy. By the seventh night something changed. It began with the lantern. Normally, it flickered weakly until morning. But that night, it went out completely though there was no wind. Omalika relit it with trembling fingers, using the small matchbox hidden in her wrapper. It burned for another hour then died again. This time when she struck the match, it hissed, and went out in her hand. She curled up tighter. Then the ground beneath her shifted. Not like a tremor, not like the wind. It was deliberate, a pressure that pressed up beneath her ribs like something turning in the soil. Omalika froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The movement stopped. She whispered, "Mama?" and immediately felt foolish. But then, faintly, ever so faintly, a knock. 3 soft taps. Not from above. From below. Omalika scrambled off the mat. Her heart thudded against her chest, loud enough to drown out the night noises. She backed away from the grave, eyes wide. Nothing happened. Nothing except the wind shifting slightly, the trees leaning in. She didn't sleep that night. In the morning she tried to tell her uncle, but the words stuck. He slapped her before she could try again. "Dreams?" he spat. "Madness. You've always been too strange." That night they gave her no mat. "Let the dirt hold you properly," Nkechi said. "Maybe it'll swallow you next." She lay on the bare soil. The grave had flattened some with time, but the earth was still fresh, loose in a way that didn't feel right. It clung to her skin, stuck to her back. As the night deepened, she tried to stay still. But again the ground moved. And this time something touched her. It was quick, a brush along her ankle like a finger tracing skin. She kicked, scrambled backward, staring at the mound. A section of soil had caved in slightly, like a breath had been released from below. She stared for hours, unmoving. In the days that followed she barely ate. The grave kept calling her back. Each night she lay there, and each night the presence grew stronger. It never harmed her, but it never stopped. Sometimes she heard her name whispered beneath the soil. Sometimes the dirt around her would feel warm, as if someone below had pressed their hand flat against the surface. Then came the 14th night. She woke up coughing, not from dust but from the smell. A sweet, rotting stench, faint but persistent. She sat up, eyes scanning the dark. The grave was open. Not fully. But the center had split, a crack running from head to foot. Something had clawed from inside. The edges were rough as if fingers had dug upward. And lying on top of the soil, half buried, was her mother's necklace. The same necklace she'd been buried with. A carved piece of ebony on a red string. Omalika stared at it for a long time before reaching out and touching it. It was warm. Too warm. She didn't scream. Instead, she held the necklace tight and whispered into the open crack, "I know you're trying. I know you're not at peace." From within the earth, something sighed. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, when her aunt came to mock her, she found Omalika sitting cross-legged on the grave, eyes unblinking, necklace around her neck. "You look like her," Nkechi muttered, suddenly uneasy. That evening, the grave refused her. When she stepped onto it, the soil turned hot. Burning. She leapt back, crying out. That was the first time she made a sound since the death. Her aunt slapped her hard. "You think you can refuse the dead now?" That night, they tied her to a stake next to the grave. "If you won't lay on her, you'll lay near her," Emeka said. But Omalika didn't cry. She stared at the grave, tears silent, fingers clenched. And in the silence, the earth cracked further. By morning, her ropes were undone. Her hands were free. No one could explain it. Her uncle grew furious. Her aunt stopped speaking. That day, a neighbor came running. "The grave," he gasped. It's open. And it's empty." They rushed to the back. The earth had split wide, no body inside. Only claw marks. Only emptiness. The coffin lid had been pushed upward. Omalika stood beside the hole, necklace glowing faintly. She turned to her aunt. She was never at rest. And you knew why. Her voice was calm, but something behind it shook the air. Emeka lunged forward, but the ground buckled beneath him. A tree branch snapped and fell, pinning him to the soil. Kechi screamed. Omalika turned and walked inside. She never slept on the grave again. But each night she heard footsteps in the backyard, gentle, slow. Her mother's rhythm. On the third night after the grave split open, the sky was thick with clouds that held no rain, and the air was still, too still. The kind of silence that felt like breath held too long. Omalika sat beside the torn grave with her knees pulled to her chest. Her fingers clutched tightly around the ebony necklace that still pulsed with unnatural warmth. Her aunt had stopped coming outside. Her uncle avoided her eyes during the day. And still, no one could explain how the grave had emptied itself, or how a girl, barely 16, kept waking with things no one could account for. Footprints that didn't match hers, warm soil where none should be, and the unspoken name of a mother who wouldn't stay buried. Sleep came to her slowly, dragging her down like something underwater. And when it came, it didn't come gently. She stood in the center of a dark forest, barefoot, her skin humming as if touched by tiny wings. The sky above was not black, but glowing with thousands of pinpricks of gold, fireflies. They floated like stars made restless, drifting between tree branches, brushing against her cheeks and eyelids. Their light didn't blind, it soothed, warm like memory, soft like breath. Then came the sound, soft footsteps behind her, the rustle of cloth and the weight of presence. She turned. Her mother stood there, not as she was in her final days, frail, tired, fading, but strong, radiant. Her skin glowed like the fireflies, pulsing faintly. Her eyes were deep and endless, like rivers that knew secrets. Her dress flowed around her ankles, made of some fabric that shimmered between light and ash. She didn't speak. She only looked, and Omalika, even in the dream, felt tears rise behind her eyes for the first time since the funeral. "Mama," she whispered, the word so small it hurt. Her mother smiled, not with lips but with her whole being. Then she raised one hand and from it appeared a flower, a small white bloom, innocent, pure. She held it toward Omalika. As soon as the girl reached out to take it, the petals caught flame. No smoke. No heat. Only bright fire, licking the air without sound, without pain. Her mother still held it. Still smiled. Omalika stared at the burning flower, unsure. Then her mother leaned in close, and though her lips didn't move, her voice echoed inside the girl's mind, like it was blooming from the deepest part of her. "What burns remembers. What remembers returns." Then the fireflies swarmed. Thousands of golden lights rushed around them, fast and wild. The trees bent. The air twisted. The flower in her mother's hand turned to ash. And just before she vanished, her mother reached out and touched Omalika's heart with her palm. a searing, tender warmth that sent her stumbling backward. She woke on the grave with a cry. Her hands trembled. Her chest burned faintly as if someone had pressed a glowing brand to it. She looked down, and there beside her on the grave lay the flower. Blackened. Still smoldering. Real. She stared at it for a long time. Then she reached forward and touched it. It was warm. That morning she didn't speak to anyone. She went about her chores quietly, even as Nkechi scowled and muttered that the girl was playing the possessed. But as she carried the water, as she swept the compound, as she peeled the cassava, her mind swirled with her mother's eyes. With the burning flower. With the fireflies that had circled her like a crown. That night she placed the burned flower beneath her pillow. The dreams came again, not always full, not always clear. Sometimes it was a flash of her mother's eyes across the surface of a river. Sometimes it was her voice singing the lullabies from childhood in a language that sounded older than Igbo, older than any human tongue. And always the fireflies returned, glowing brighter each time, gathering not just around her but within her. She began to glow in the dreams too. At first only her hands. Then her face. One morning Omalika walked into the kitchen, and her uncle dropped his cup. "Your eyes," he muttered. They're not right." She ran to the small broken mirror and stared. They looked normal. But something shimmered faintly in the reflection, like gold dust behind her pupils. That night she stayed up after dark and sat beside the grave waiting. She didn't sleep. She didn't move. She simply waited. And they came. First the fireflies. Dozens at first, then hundreds, filling the backyard like floating embers. The trees bowed. The grass rustled though there was no wind. And then the soil of the grave cracked slightly. Not wide, not like before, but enough to send a small curl of smoke rising into the air. The fireflies hovered over the crack. One by one they dove into the soil, vanishing into the grave. Omalika watched, silent, eyes burning with unshed tears. She didn't move until the last one was gone. Then she whispered, I remember everything." The next morning she awoke to find that every flower in the compound had turned toward the grave, like sunflowers reaching for light. Her aunt slapped her that day. Harder than before. What have you done? What curse did your mother leave us with?" Omalika didn't flinch. She simply looked at her aunt and said, "She's not gone." That night the neighbors saw it. A pillar of gold light rising from the earth behind the house, like lightning frozen mid-bolt. It stretched toward the sky and hummed. And inside it, barely visible, a woman's silhouette stood, holding a flower of flame. People screamed. Some ran. Others dropped to their knees. By morning the grave was smooth again. No crack. No sign of disturbance. But in the center of the grave, where nothing had grown since the burial, a single white flower bloomed, its petals glowing faintly even in the light of dawn. News spread. The priest came. He tried to bless the ground. The flower turned to ash beneath his holy water. The chief's wife came. She knelt and cried for her own dead daughter, begging for a sign. The flower bloomed again. Each night after that, Omalika lit a small lamp beside the grave and sat with her legs folded, waiting. The fireflies returned. Always. Some nights they danced in slow spirals. Some nights they formed shapes, a woman's hand, a heart, a spiral flame. Her uncle stopped sleeping. Her aunt began to mutter prayers under her breath. And then one night the dream stopped. Instead of the glowing forest, instead of the silent voice, Omalika found herself in a dry, red place. The sky was cracked. The ground was ash. No fireflies. No mother. Only a hole in the earth. And from it hands. Dozens of hands reaching, grasping. Not just for her. For anyone. For anything. She ran. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The next night she went to the grave and whispered, "Where did you go? Mama, where are you now?" The fireflies didn't come. But in the center of the flower, a second bloom appeared, black as charcoal. She touched it. It was cold. From that night on her dreams changed. Her mother no longer came smiling. She came weeping, whispering that the fire had opened a door, but not all who came through should have. That memory was power and fire was hunger. "Something else came back with me," her voice said one night, "and it is still hungry." That morning Omalika woke to find her aunt missing. They searched the village. They found her slipper in the forest. A necklace tangled in a tree. But no body. Emeka tried to run that night. He packed a bag, muttering that the devil lived in the backyard. But the fireflies blocked his path. They formed a ring around the compound. When he touched one, it burned him. Omalika watched from the doorway. She said nothing. That was the last night she slept beside the grave. Now she slept in her mother's bed, the room cleaned, the curtains drawn back to let the moonlight in. The burned flower was kept in a clay bowl by the window. It never wilted. It never crumbled. And once a month, a new petal caught flame. One morning she found a letter under her pillow. Written in her mother's handwriting. Not all fire is ruin. Some fire remembers. And when it remembers love, it never dies. Omalika folded it and placed it beneath her pillow. And when she finally cried, it was not from grief, but from something deeper. Something like knowing. Each morning, before the sun could fully stretch over the horizon, Omalika would step outside into the still damp dawn. Her breath always came in slow clouds. The grave waited, silent but never still. And each morning the soil atop it had shifted again. Sometimes barely, a faint crumble near the headstone, a slightly sunken patch near where her mother's hands would have rested. Other times, more alarming, long shallow grooves carved across the earth as though a rake had passed over it, or, as she began to suspect, as though something beneath had clawed upward, seeking air. She did not tell her aunt. Not at first. She only knelt beside the grave and brushed her fingers lightly over the fresh marks. The soil was never muddy, never soft enough to collapse under its own weight. Yet it bore these wounds every morning as if it were being stirred from below. As if the grave didn't want to remain a grave. One morning she found a single fingernail lying on the surface, caked in earth, broken at the edge. She pocketed it without thinking. That night the dreams returned, but not like before. They were no longer wrapped in the soft glow of fireflies or filled with her mother's radiant face. These dreams were sharp, too bright, edged in something metallic. She stood in places she didn't recognize, hills where trees bled sap as thick as blood, rivers where fish sang dirges in her mother's voice, and skies full of birds that didn't flap their wings, but glided in perfect silence, following her. And always the soil beneath her feet itched. Not with bugs or grass but with hunger. In one dream she looked down and saw roots pushing out from her fingertips, winding down her arms, piercing her skin from within. They pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't hers, as though something beneath the earth had begun to graft itself into her blood. She woke to find her fingernails packed with dirt. When she asked her aunt for a basin to wash, Nkechi scowled. "You sleep too close to the dead," she muttered. "They remember your name when you do that. And they start whispering it to things that don't forget." Omalika stared at her, silent. Nkechi's hands trembled as she sliced the cassava. "You don't look like yourself anymore. You don't even sound like her daughter." That night, Omalika went to the grave with the broken fingernail in her palm. She knelt beside the soil and whispered, "Is it really you, Mama? Or something else?" The wind shifted. A breathless hush swept through the trees. And the grave breathed. She felt it. A slow inhale beneath the soil, like the land itself had taken a lungful of air and held it. Then silence. She placed the nail back into the dirt and didn't move. That was when the shadow came. It slithered from the base of the tree behind her, curling like smoke. It wasn't shaped like anything, not a man, not a beast. Just a sliver of dark that peeled away from the night itself and settled beside her on the ground. It bowed. Oh. And Omalika's heart didn't race. It stilled as though this too was expected. She didn't speak to it. It didn't speak to her. When she rose and turned to go, the shadow followed. The next morning, Nkechi found scratch marks on the kitchen door. "You're bringing things back with you," she snapped, throwing salt across the threshold. "Don't pretend you don't know what you are. I always said your mother was too soft with you. Now look." Omalika didn't answer. She'd begun to notice other things, things no one else saw. Birds stopped chirping when she passed. The goat, once stubborn and loud, refused to meet her eyes. The well water shimmered with reflections that weren't hers. And on 3 separate mornings she woke to find her hair tangled with leaves, not the dry brown ones scattered around the graveyard, but fresh green ones as though picked directly from a living tree. That evening as she sat by the fire, her aunt finally said it outright. "You're not the same girl who cried at the funeral," she whispered, not meeting Omalika's gaze. "Whatever you buried that night, didn't stay buried. And it's reaching for you now." Omalika turned to her. "I didn't bury her," she said. "They did. And they didn't ask if she was done speaking." Nkechi spat into the fire. "The dead don't speak." Omalika smiled. "Then why do they scratch?" The fire flickered. The following week brought rain. Heavy, punishing, relentless. And every morning the grave bore deeper gashes. Once, Omalika found what looked like the edge of a jawbone just barely breaking the surface. She didn't dig it up. She didn't need to. Because that night, in her dreams, she bit something, and woke with the taste of iron in her mouth. She went to the priest, not to confess, to ask, "Can the dead walk without feet?" The old man blinked, startled. "Child?" I said. She leaned forward, voice steady. "If someone was buried but not finished, can they walk in other ways?" The priest hesitated. "In dreams, perhaps. In memory. In madness." Omalika stared at him. "Not madness." He looked up at her then, truly looked. "What did your mother call you before she died?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "She whispered something my last night with her. I've been dreaming it. I hear it sometimes in the soil." He paled. "Don't speak it aloud." "I haven't." "Good. Then maybe you still have a chance to stay human." She stood. He didn't bless her. When she returned home, Nkechi had packed her things. "You'll go to your father's cousin's house in the hills," she said. "This is done." Omalika didn't argue. She gathered her belongings and walked out. But she didn't go to the hills. She went to the forest. To her mother's birthplace, a grove once used for ancestral rituals, now overgrown and forgotten. And there she waited. For 3 nights. On the 4th the shadows came again. Not just one. Many. They gathered around her in a ring, never touching, never speaking. And then the ground opened. Not violently. Not loudly. Just split. And from it roots rose. Thick, black, glistening roots that wound up her ankles, over her calves, curling around her knees like hands. They didn't hurt. They held her steady. And in the center of the clearing, her mother appeared. Not glowing. Not smiling. But whole. Real. She stood with soil clinging to her feet, with branches woven through her hair. She didn't speak. She just looked. Then, slowly she lifted her hands. And on her palms 2 names were carved. One was Omalika's. The other wasn't. "Who is that?" she asked. Her mother's lips moved, but the wind took the sound away. Then her voice came from the roots, from the shadows, from the very soil. "You are her." "But not yet." Omalika dropped to her knees. "What am I becoming?" And the earth answered, "A memory made flesh. A voice once buried. A root that still remembers the fire." She wept. And the roots wept with her. When she returned to the village, people stepped aside. Children whispered. And on her mother's grave the scratches had stopped. But now the name carved into the headstone glowed faintly, with a pulse like a heartbeat. Each night she still dreams. And in every dream the trees bow. The shadows kneel. And she wakes with roots curled gently around her fingers, like something beneath the earth is holding her hand. Still remembering. Still waiting. The word came on the 5th night after the roots first wrapped around her fingers. Omalika had grown used to dreams shaped like riddles. Her mother standing silent beneath a moon that pulsed like a heartbeat, or fireflies spelling patterns in the air that dissolved the moment she tried to read them. But this dream was different. There was no moon. No sky. Only a space without walls, filled with the hum of unseen things. And at the center of it all stood her mother, cloaked in ash and shadow, her eyes 2 slow-burning coals. She stepped forward and cupped Omalika's chin. Her lips parted. And one word dropped from her tongue like a stone into a still pond, "Isizuka." Omalika whispered it back in the dream. The world around her convulsed. 1,000 trees bowed. Water ran uphill. Fireflies screamed. She woke gasping. The grave was still beneath her, but the wind had changed. It no longer came from the east as it always had. It came from everywhere at once, then nowhere. It curled around her ankles like a snake and tugged at her dress like a child pleading to be held. It whispered back, "Isizuka," in fragmented echoes. She stood. The word clung to her tongue. Unspoken but alive. She walked into the house and sat at the small wooden table as her aunt stirred the morning ogi. Her uncle sat sharpening his blade, chewing kola nut with the slow force of a man always angry about something. Omalika didn't speak. Not at first. She simply sat. Then the word rose again, not like breath but like hunger. "Isizuka." It forced its way through her mouth, soft and low. And the wind howled. It slammed against the windows with the fury of 1,000 hands. The thatch roof hissed. The fire pit died in an instant. Chickens in the yard screeched, and dropped where they stood. Lifeless. Bet. As though something had sucked their last breath away mid-step. Nkechi screamed, dropping her bowl. "What did you say? What name is that?" "I dreamt it," Omalika said. "You dared to speak it aloud?" Her aunt shrieked, backing away, clutching her chest as if the word itself might slit her throat. "I didn't mean to." "You invited it," her uncle roared, rising. "You brought the wind here. You cursed this house. He struck her. What? Twice. Her head rang, but the words stayed in her mouth like a root refusing to be pulled. He dragged her by the wrist out the door across the yard to the grave. You will not sleep here anymore. You'll not make the soil turn against us. I didn't. He shoved her down. You think you're special? That you're the only one who misses the dead? Your mother was a curse. And you're her echo. He stormed back toward the house. Amalika sat there trembling. The wind stilled. Everything held its breath. And then from behind her, a whisper. Not her voice. Not her mother's. Something older. It said, he will see tonight. That evening the house was quiet. Her aunt did not look at her. Her uncle drank palm wine until his eyes turned to stone. They locked her in the back shed. No blankets. No lamp. The wind slid through the cracks. Amalika curled in a corner and whispered the word to herself again. Isizuka. Outside the chickens didn't cluck. The goats didn't move. The trees leaned inward. At midnight, a scream shattered the stillness. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of recognition. Her uncle. By the time Nkechi opened the shed, the night was no longer dark. It was glowing, lit by a strange, flickering pulse from the graveyard. They found him there. On his knees. Mouth full of soil. Nails bleeding. His body drenched in wet earth. His eyes open wide not with fear, but with awe. She's still there, he whispered. She called me by my true name. Nkechi wailed. Amalika stepped closer to him. What did she say? He turned to her slowly. She said I would rot from the inside for every lie I ever told you about her. Then he coughed and spat out a tooth. It wasn't his. It was black, glistening old. He passed out. Amalika didn't move. She watched as the grave pulsed once, a soft rise and fall like breath. The wind settled again. The next morning her uncle could no longer walk. His legs were stiff, twisted. The priest said it was a curse of the blood. The healer said it was poison in the marrow. But Amalika knew. He had heard the word too. Isizuka. She returned to the grave that night. Alone. Why did you give me that word? She whispered. No answer. Only the wind curling around her again. She sat, fingers in the soil, and began to hum, a song she didn't remember learning. Above her, fireflies blinked into being. 1,000 tiny eyes. Watching. That night, the grave was quiet. Too quiet. The fireflies didn't appear. The soil was still. The wind that had whispered her name the past few nights had gone silent, like it too was holding its breath. Amalika lay across the mound, arms wrapped around her chest, eyes wide in the dark. She could not sleep. Not until a soft rhythm began somewhere far away, a song not sung but breathed. It was the sound of something moving through mist. And then the smoke came. At first, it was a trickle curling from the cracks in the grave like incense. Then it thickened, coiling up like a snake, slow and deliberate. But it didn't sting her eyes. It smelled faintly of rain on ash, of her mother's head wraps and burnt pepper stew, of stories half told. The smoke didn't rise. It gathered. And from it a shape stepped forward. Small. Child-sized. She was no older than 6, with long limbs and a neck that curved too sharply. Her body shimmered like a flame behind glass, never fully settling into focus. But her face, it was soft and round, half lost in the swirl of smoke that made her. And her eyes, those eyes were coals in a winter fire. She smiled at Amalika, then began to dance. She circled the grave 3 times, never touching the ground, feet spinning in small skips, like a child playing a game that no one else understood. As she moved, she hummed. No words. Just vibration. Amalika sat up, unable to speak. The child paused and tilted her head. Then spoke in a voice like smoke escaping a crack in a wall. If a mother dies but does not stop watching, is she dead or dreaming? Amalika swallowed hard. What are you? The child laughed. It sounded like a whisper through a reed flute. I am not made. I am left behind. Then she reached out with one hand, fingers long, wispy, and placed them gently on Amalika's chest. Amalika felt no weight, only warmth. A warmth that began to burn. Not pain but pressure, like a name being written behind her ribs. The child stepped back. And then, like a puff of wind had found her, she scattered. Dissolved into ribbons of smoke that drifted back down into the earth, curling into the cracks of the tomb. Amalika didn't sleep after that. When dawn broke, the village stirred slowly. She walked into the square on legs that felt borrowed. Old men stretched. Market women unrolled mats. Roosters crowed, and the morning rhythm began again. But Omalika didn't look at them. She looked at the far corner of the square near the well, where the child stood. The same child, unmoving, watching her, still made of smoke. She was clearer now in daylight. The mist of her body seemed denser, as if the sun gave her shape. But she still did not touch the ground. Her toes hovered just above the soil. Villagers passed her, not noticing. Not a single person turned. Not even when she began to walk slowly toward Omalika. No footsteps. Just motion. Omalika stepped backward instinctively. But the child stopped, tilted her head, and whispered something without sound. Then she pointed. To the center of the square. And vanished. No smoke. No drift. Just gone. Later that day, Omalika asked a group of children if they had seen the strange girl. They looked at her blankly. What girl? There was no one there. You must have dreamed it. But she knew better. She knew the child wasn't a dream. She knew because she saw her again that night, this time in the reflection of a bowl of water. Not standing, but crouching on the roof, watching. The next morning the chickens wouldn't go near the grave. They clucked and screeched and ran away from it as if something hissed from underneath. Nkechi noticed. This is your doing, she spat. You bring bad spirits here with your silence. You let the grave open. That's why things don't stay buried. Omalika said nothing. She went to the stream, fetched water, and stared into it for a long time. The child appeared again. This time on the surface of the water, not beside her but in the reflection. Her lips moved. Omalika leaned closer. The reflection whispered, You were named before your naming. She carried the word for you in her blood. Now it is yours. Then the surface rippled. The child was gone. But her voice echoed in Omalika's ears long after. That night, Omalika didn't go to the grave. She stayed inside watching from the cracked window. The fireflies had returned, but only one at first. Then 2. Then 50. Swarming in a slow circle above the mound like a silent procession. She stepped outside. And found the child already waiting. This time not alone. Around the grave stood shadows. Faint outlines of women. Some tall, some bent. Some holding babies. Some empty-handed. All smoky. All silent. The child turned. And all the shadows turned with her. Omalika could not breathe. The child stepped forward and whispered, Do you want to know what she gave up to leave you here? Omalika tried to nod, but her body wouldn't move. She bartered her afterlife for your name. She went where the others would not and made a space for you to bloom. That is why you dream fire. That is why the wind listens. That is why the dead are watching. Behind the child the women began to hum. A sound that came not from throats but from the space between worlds. The child opened her hand. In her palm lay a seed. It glowed faintly red, pulsing. Omalika stared. The child pressed it to her chest. It disappeared. Omalika gasped. The smoke swallowed them all again. She fell backward. Woke up the next morning in her room with soil in her mouth. She didn't tell her aunt. She didn't go to school. She didn't speak at all that day. But she noticed that everyone stepped around her now. Not out of care. Out of fear. Children didn't play near her. Neighbors muttered prayers when she passed. One old man clutched his walking stick until his knuckles went white. They didn't see the child. But they felt her. And Omalika knew she would never be left alone again. The smoke child was hers now. And she was no longer just a girl. She was becoming something else. It happened on the 7th morning after the seed was placed in her chest. Omalika woke early, long before the sun crowned the hills. Something tugged her from sleep, a scent in the wind, thick with earth and copper. She blinked slowly and sat up, already knowing, already afraid. The grave. She ran barefoot, skirts dragging through dew-soaked grass, past the silent hens, past the still slumbering goats, past her aunt's room where only bitter breath rose and fell. The field was glowing. Not with fire. Not with fireflies. But with something green. Something alive. The grave was no longer just a mound of soil. It was split wide, not as if it had been dug but as if it had given birth. From its center rose a tree. Gnarled. Knotted. Ancient, but new. Its bark was as dark as blood clotted beneath skin. Its roots bulged from the earth like thick veins, spreading in all directions as if they were still looking, still hungry. And above it, its branches split like lightning frozen in wood, clawing toward the gray sky. There were no leaves. Not yet. But a hum pulsed in the air around it, steady and slow, the rhythm of a heart. Omalika fell to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached out. The moment her fingers touched the bark, the hum grew louder. Not in the air, in her chest. The seed. It responded. The pulse of the tree met the rhythm in her body, and they locked in beat. Her heart skipped, stumbled, then fell into perfect sync. Omalika gasped. And the tree breathed. Its bark swelled and contracted slightly beneath her hand, like lungs drawing in morning air. Then she heard it, a faint voice, low and female, echoing in her skull. "I'm not your mother. But I remember her." Omalika yanked her hand back. The voice faded. She scrambled away from the roots, heart pounding, eyes wide. Behind her the house stirred. She turned and saw her aunt standing at the door, robes loose, mouth agape. Others were beginning to gather, sleepy-eyed children, neighbors, the butcher's wife with blood still drying on her apron. They stood at the edges of the field, unsure, silent. No one stepped closer. Until the oldest man in the village came. Oker, the elder who remembered things no one else dared speak of. He limped forward, his cane shaking in his grasp, and fell to one knee before the tree. "It is a spirit tree," he murmured. "It has not grown since my own grandfather's time. Not until now." His eyes rose to meet Omalika's. "And you woke it." The murmurs began. Whispers of curses. Of omens. Of girls who walked too close to the veil. Her aunt hissed a prayer through clenched teeth. "She's always been strange," one woman muttered. "That's not a tree. That's a warning." Omalika didn't speak. She only stared at the roots, and saw that they were already cracking the earth wider. Drinking deep. The next night she dreamed not of her mother, but of herself, walking through a forest made of the same tree, hundreds of them, all with bark that breathed, all whispering her name. In the dream she did not walk like a girl. She glided. And wherever she stepped, new roots bloomed. When she awoke, her hands smelled of sap. Over the next few days the tree grew. Faster than it should. Inch by inch, day by day it twisted upward. Its branches arched over the grave, forming a natural arch. Vines sprouted along its limbs, not green but silver and soft as silk. Birds stopped coming. Dogs whimpered when they passed. The tree bore no fruit. Only memories. Every time Omalika touched it she saw. Once she saw her mother standing in the river, holding a candle that would not burn. Once she saw her own birth, her mother's screams and the midwife's shaking hands, and the moment her tiny fist closed around a cord of red string no one could explain. Once she saw something yet to happen, a storm ripping through the village, roofs flying, the tree still standing tall, roots deeper than death. She stopped telling people what she saw. They didn't want to hear. One evening the priest arrived. He brought salt and oil and prayers. He poured holy water at the base of the tree. The bark spit it back. The priest stumbled backward. That night he lost his voice. The villagers stopped coming near her after that. Except the children. They came in secret. They sat near her when their parents slept, drawn to the hum of the tree and the quiet calm around Omalika. She told them stories without speaking. They saw them in the bark, moving images flickering behind knots and scars like windows into the in-between. They laughed. And the tree laughed with them, a creaking sound like a door opening slowly into the past. One night a woman came, covered in rags, face veiled, hands trembling. She knelt at the roots and wept. "I buried my child in this ground many years ago," she whispered. "And now I dream of her each night, calling me, smiling from a mouth that's not hers." She turned to Omalika. "Did you do this?" Omalika only placed a hand on the tree. The bark rippled. A knot opened. Inside something glimmered, a lock of hair curled tight like a child's. The woman sobbed. The next day the woman was gone. No one ever saw her again. The villagers whispered that the tree was stealing souls. Some wanted it cut down. But no one could bring an axe close. Blades rusted. Wood splintered. Even fire seemed to falter near its roots. And Omalika began to change. She stopped speaking entirely. But she was never silent. The wind carried her feelings. Birds circled her head like a crown. And when she walked past, doors unlatched themselves. One day her aunt tried to beat her for leaving the house too late. The whip never touched her. It unraveled in the air, turning to threads that floated to the ground. Omalika turned. And for the first time her aunt saw what was behind her eyes. Not a child, not grief, not madness. But memory made flesh. The next morning her aunt left the village. That night the tree bore fruit. Not apples. Not oranges. But spheres of amber, each one pulsing with a faint light. Omalika picked one. Inside she saw a vision. The village in fire, people screaming, and the tree split in half, something crawling out from the center. She dropped the fruit. It vanished before it hit the ground. Now the tree whispered more often. Not just in dreams but while she sat beneath it. It said things like, "Your name is a key," and "The roots remember all that the sky forgets." And sometimes just her mother's name, over and over, like a lullaby sung by leaves. Amalika understood now. The grave had never been just a resting place. It had been a gate. And she had been chosen not to mourn, but to guard. Whatever her mother had done in her last breath, it had echoed deep. It had woken the soil. And the soil had answered with a tree that would never die. Unless she let it. Unless she spoke the word that her mother whispered in her dream, the word that made the wind change, that made chickens die, that made graves crack. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, she sat beneath the tree each day, listening, remembering, growing. And each night, she dreamed of roots that reached deeper. And something stirring far beneath them. The first time Amalika heard them, she thought it was only wind shifting under the tree roots. A hush beneath her dreams, curling like fingers around her sleeping ears. But then she began to recognize patterns. Cadences. Chants. They weren't dreams. They were voices. Not just one. Many. Soft and low like songs swallowed too long. Like names spoken through cracked teeth. They came in the deadest hours of night, when the stars were heavy with silence and the moon had tipped too low to shine properly. When even the dogs refused to bark. Amalika would lie on the floor of her hut, eyes closed, arms folded, heart awake, and listen. At first it was only her mother's voice. Gentle. Familiar. Still thick with the ache of everything that had been taken. Still full of the light that glowed in the firefly dream. But soon others came. Whispers layered beneath the soil like old seeds waking. Some wept while they spoke. Others laughed, not cruelly but wildly. As if they'd remembered a secret no one else knew. A girl with a split tongue who had never been allowed to speak. A woman drowned for dancing on a burial path. A widow buried alive with her husband so he wouldn't be lonely. Their names were never said. But Amalika felt them in her mouth when she woke. Not names like humans gave each other, but true names. The kind carved into bone before breath. The kind the wind never forgot. They did not ask her for vengeance. They asked her to remember. And they taught her. Not lessons in numbers or herbs or harvest. But language. The language that dirt speaks when it shifts over bones. The language of blood spilled in silence. The tongue that birds forget when caged too long. Amalika learned by listening. By dreaming. By letting her tongue move on its own as she slept, repeating syllables that didn't belong to any living people. Some nights, she woke with soil beneath her fingernails and her lips stained dark. Once she coughed, and a pebble tumbled from her mouth. Her aunt noticed. She began sleeping with a knife under her pillow, hissing prayers over oil and salt. She watched Amalika from doorways, fingers twitching, face pale. "What did you let in?" she asked her once, voice brittle. Amalika didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. But the language was growing in her. Thickening like roots. Taking up space where fear once lived. Then one night the tree hummed louder than it ever had. The bark peeled slightly, revealing more of the pulsing knots inside. And Amalika felt the voices gather beneath her, a choral breath waiting to be exhaled. She didn't sleep that night. She only closed her eyes and listened. And in the morning she knew. She stepped into the house just after sunrise. Her aunt was kneeling by the hearth, lips moving in frantic prayer, eyes dark with suspicion. Amalika opened her mouth. And let the language pour out. Not all of it. Just one sentence. One sentence shaped like grief sharpened into a blade. The moment the words hit the air, her aunt gasped. Her eyes rolled. Her knees buckled and she fell sideways onto the mat, not dead but unplugged as if something inside her had come loose. Her hands trembled, clawing at the floor. She whispered, "Don't say that again. Don't say that again." Amalika stood above her, calm. The tree pulsed outside, louder now, as if approving. The language was not meant to destroy. But it revealed. It pulled things from people they hid. And her aunt had much to hide. Later that night, the ground beneath the grave grew warm. Amalika placed her ear to the roots and heard them again, all the women, all the mouths. They were laughing now. Not mockingly, not cruelly. With relief. As if, at last, someone had heard them. Someone had remembered. Someone was speaking back.